On the show today, we have Bob Chartier, and here is why he is awesome. He's an author, writer, keynote speaker, artisan. Yeah, I saw a bit of pot throwing there on his website, and musician. You can see a few of his instruments behind him. He's a Renaissance man, that Bob. He worked in the public service for 45 years before going out on his own, focusing on leadership through engagement. And his best selling book, Handcrafted Leadership: The Art and Craft of Building Engaged Workplace and Communities. I could not recommend it enough. It's where we're going to be pulling a lot of the inspiration for our conversation today. And he's here. Hello, Bob.
Hello, Russell. Thanks for inviting me, and congratulations on your work. It's work that's really important these days, to have conversations about the workplace in a broader scope rather than just in a workshop somewhere. It's great.
Complete you. I really appreciate that. It was always, to me, seeing leaders and not blaming leaders, but leaders not having the tools, not having the support, and and feeling like they're basically out there on their own trying to do this thing. If I can help in a small way, yay! That's not
Yeah.
a horrible thing. So let's kick off our conversation with the question I ask all of my guests, Bob, which is, you, sir, what is your best or worst employee experience?
I really been thinking about that. There's so many situations that we're both, of course, but the one that floats back to me today as I was thinking about it, the one that one thing that deals with relationships that was really critical for me was I spent a couple of decades working with First Nations, of course. And one of my little legacy pieces was helping transfer about 50 schools across Canada to First Nations control. And it was right from the get go, I had a relationship with First Nations in the education field and subsequently in leadership as well. But just a very simple thing. I ended up taking the principalship of a small on reserve school. And we were dealing with all kinds of issues and working with a brand new school board and everything. But one of the issues that schools do is parent teacher days. Just a very simple thing, but parent, and we have mental models about how those things should work. And a teacher's mental model about how it works is the kids don't come to school that day, but the parents come in to the school and I sit them on a little chair and interview them about their kids, right? And we did one, the first one, and it was a disaster. It was, nobody showed up. And of course, First Nations people in those days, first of all, they didn't even think it was their school and they were nervous. And I don't know, there could have been 100 reasons why they didn't come to the school. So the next one that we had, the next session, I remember saying to the teachers, we need a relationship with these parents. And, and so I'm going to insist that instead of asking them to come to the school, we're going to get in our cars and we're going to drive and we're going to go knock on their doors and we're going to go visit them in their homes. And I got a lot of resistance at first from that. But I remember at the end of the day, talking to the staff and talking to people about what their experiences were. And it was amazing. They were, of course, invited in. Some had a cup of tea. It was one of the biggest moments for them as a staff. And I think those were the early days when I was starting to realize that the whole notion of your work is not just about doing a job. It's about the relationships with each other, the relationships with who's in charge, the relationship with who you serve, the relationship, all those, that's all relationship based. And I ended up working with First Nations, of course. I learned early in the piece, you go have tea with the elders. You open a meeting with a prayer and just different things like that. That were all based on respect and relationship building. And And so I took that into government as well. And the same idea, really, except a little bit more resistance, I guess. And it's something we'll maybe talk about a bit later, but the notion of how big organizations tend to still think that they're factories and that there's all kinds of different silos and different kind of layers, and that there's no crossing in those layers. And so that's just one small simple story, but I mean, there's a ton of them, of things that I remember thinking that we should be doing here that would improve our relationship. And then I got into the whole notion. I went back to school. I did this master's course in learning organizations. And that's when I started to realize that, hey, the other thing you need for relationship building is a good tool. Like, and it's not enough to just, oh, we should have more coffee. We should, I remember just a simple little story. I don't know who taught me the tool or if I thought about it myself, but it's a simple little tool called the stand up. And the idea of the stand up is that a team will, before they start work that day, will take 10 or 15 minutes, get in a circle, not sitting down. It's not a meeting. There's no agenda. And just go around that circle and say, how are you? Good morning, right? Something that we often don't do in organizations. We just walk in, take our coffee, sit down at our computer. Sometimes we don't even say hello to our fellow team people until 10 o'clock, and we see him in the corridor. Anyways, I remember trying to introduce this and some resistance about it. And I remember one person told me, Bob, I said it would be good for relationship building too, to in the morning, once a day at least, eyeball each other and say good morning. How's it going to go today? And one fellow said, Bob, hey man, we always go for beers. At least we go for a beer. Oh, I said, that's right. Yeah, you do. You must have the relationship stuff really handled because you go for beers down at the King Eddie or whatever. Yeah, he says, that's really great. That's really great. I said, are the women there with you? No, they don't come. The secretary doesn't come. Yeah. And, how about Freddie? No, Freddie doesn't drink. So if what they thought was a great relationship builder, which was this social thing, was actually a clique. And it was actually doing more harm in the relationship thing. So a lot of times we get this notion that relationship building is kind of a social thing. And we just need to have a potluck once in a while or go for beers. No, you need tools. And that's why that little stand-up tool every morning, that little tool made you say good morning, made you say at 10 o'clock today, we got guests coming in. We got to look after that. It was a tool that, well, it was incredible how to improve relationships. And yeah, I had to learn from the early days working with First Nations. It was very informal, but then I got into that stage where I realized that, hey, just like a carpenter needs a good toolbox, relationship building, communication, all problem solving, all those things needed tools as well. And so that was really a big leap for my thinking, and not my thinking and my practice, because I took it on myself to bring that stuff into the public sector, right?
I mean,
So yeah,
you're talking to the show called Relationships at Work, so it's not like you're
yeah,
preaching. You're basically running exactly what inspired me to start this. Is the whole point that relationships matter in the workplace, and to hear your story working with First Nations and the benefit to your staff and your team, seeing the value in the impact of the work. It's one thing to talk about relationships. It's another one to get intention, impact, and value all connected to that. And
Right.
so that's what I want to pull back a bit around your tools, because in your book and the inspiration for our conversation today is a term called possibility action. And a big piece of this show is defining terms, because as much as we throw terms around all the time and buzzwords and synergies here and there, we don't actually say what the hell they are. So
Yeah.
I really want, from your perspective, what are we talking about, Bob, when we talk about possibility action?
Yeah. Actually, there's 3 words in there. It's in chapter 7 in my book. And it was the great learning from a very wonderful friend and colleague, Karen Bonner, who became a professional coach. And she's the one that brought this to me. Now, set the context of relationship. There's 3 words: relationship, possibility, action. And so I grew up in those 45 years. I saw a lot of what I would call action heroes. And they were, a lot of times they were men, right? I'm not saying all the time, but for the most part, they were kind of gung ho guys. If they were in Alberta, they would be get her done, that get her done. And they would come into a meeting, they'd come into the boardroom, slap the table hard and say, all right, I want 3 action items. That's what I want, 3 action items. And the rest of us are going, who the hell are you? Like, we didn't even know you. Or what? And you already want action items, but he had the authority, so we would give him 3 action items. And off he would go, happy as hell. Not realizing, though, that there were 10 people left in that room who thought he was a jerk, and who won't give him any help on those action items. He hadn't done anything in that room to establish a relationship with those 10 people. All he wanted out of them was his 3 action items. And so that really hit me when I started thinking about these characters and the culture that we were developing around action. And it was rewarded. These people were actually they were rewarded for this. And Karen helped me understand about the critical nature of relationship. Now, the word relationship also has some real, it's the word I'm trying to use. It's sticky. And it's sticky in that it's kind of misunderstood. I used to talk about, used to drive me crazy. We talked about soft skills and hard skills. You ever heard that term? Soft
I
skills
hate
and
it.
hard.
I
Yeah, it's
hate it.
horrible. And the hard skills were the get the data, get the agenda, get the financial, blah, 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 blah. And then the soft skills were those people things. Oh, that's for the ladies in HR. Us guys will handle the hard stuff and they can do the soft skills stuff. It was insane. And there, there's a bit of a gender thing with relationship. And there's a lot of times men, if you say, how's your relationship with your fellow staff members? They'll panic. Like, what do you mean? What do you, or if you just say, how's your relationship? They'll go, well, are you talking to my wife? Like they just don't know what is going on here. You talk to a woman, and often she'll say, we got some problems here. We got some good things going here. They have a bit of a little more empathy towards the word itself. That's the first big wrestle is the word. We got to deal with that word. Anyways, I'll come back to that. There's just some very simple things that action hero could have done to establish. One of the tools that I teach is called the check-in. When you have a meeting and you go around the room and everybody checks in where they're at, why they think they're there, and who they are, and just simple stuff. But then the second thing is possibility. So the action guy came in, got his 3 actions and left. But he didn't open up any possibilities in that room. He just went straight to the action. So in my opinion, if you have a problem Oh, let's say if you're working in the forestry department and you want to change the tree planting, I don't know, whatever. And so you go in and I want 3 action items. We're going to do this and this. That's one way. With the 3 relationship possibility action, the first thing you would do is establish a team to look at it. You'd probably take a tool like a workout. The team would work on who we are. They'd build a little charter together. What's our code of conduct? What's our roles and responsibilities? That's how you build a relationship, is build a charter together, right? So now it doesn't take that long. This is not 2 months of charter. It's an afternoon. But that team now knows who each other are. They know what kind of a working relationship they're going to have. Then they do. Now you've got our relationship established. What are the possibilities on establishing this new forest management thing? What do you do? If you only have 10 people's ideas, that's pretty narrow. So you say, let's do a survey or let's do an open space. We'll put a couple hundred people in a room for an afternoon and ask them, frontline people, what they think. And you do an open space and you get 120 recommendations. Now, what's another word for 120 recommendations? 120 possibilities, right? So now you've got a great relationship established with the working team. You've got 120 possibilities. Now you can go into a room and get 3 action items out of those possibilities. But it has to go that way, Russell. It has to go relationship first, then possibilities, then action. And if you're jumping to action right away, you're probably losing on the relationship and possibilities. Does that make sense?
It does. And that makes me ask, okay, so those leaders that dive right into that action, how do you feel they're damaging their culture? How do you feel they're damaging the relationships, their employee experience by approaching every interaction like that?
First of all, let me just be really almost aggressive.
Mm.
If you're a leader and you're in constant action mode and we send you to Singapore to do a deal, you're going to get your ass, sorry, my language, but you're going to get your butt kicked, right? In those cultures, you've got to establish a relationship. Can I tell you a quick story about
Please.
how I learned that, the power of that? I was doing that master's program and I was in a class where he put us into pairs, and the pair of us, of my partner and I, we had to take a problem, an urban problem, and then we had to come up with some solutions, and then we had to sign a contract as if we were both consultants to how we were going to do it. And so I was paired with this guy, a Chinese guy, really great guy, and we got along well, and we were hardworking, and we got our project done, except we didn't sign a contract. And he seemed to be reluctant to sign the contract. And I kept meeting him, no, let's get that. Oh, no. One day he said, Bob, he says, you're bugging me about that. He says, we should have lunch. I said, sure. He says, you ever have Chinese food? I said, of course I've had those balls of purple sauce. No, he says, real Chinese food. This is in Toronto. So he takes me to this wonderful little Chinese cafe on Spadina. We go up these back stairs and there's steam and ducks. And I mean, it's wonderful. And we have lunch and we are telling stories about my dad, the Saskatchewan plumber, and his dad, the Hong Kong policeman. And we're just having a great time. Halfway through, he stops me and he said, Bob, let's sign that contract. And I said, what's going on, man? Like, I don't understand. He said, I'm just trying to teach you something, Bob. I said, what are you trying to teach me? He says, my friend, if you're ever going to do business with Asian people, you're going to have to get a relationship first. Now that we've eaten together, told some stories together, got to know each other, I can now work with you. But I would be a faker if I signed that contract without doing this work. And that just hit me like a ton of bricks. Oh my God. And yes, leaders that don't understand that in other cultures. I mean, I knew that from First Nations cultures that I had to establish relations, but it's all over the world. And so if you're working in some little government department, and you think you're the smartest guy in the world that can ask for three action items, you are you- you're going down a bad road, in my opinion.
And any leader in that situation might also start using words like diversity, equity, inclusivity, and they're
Yeah,
kind of ignoring those if they approach everything as an action item because they're not taking anything else into consideration other than what they want and what they need or what their boss needs that they're trying to serve
yeah,
in that moment. I can see that
yeah.
absolutely fracturing.
Absolutely. And I mean, I mean, we are now moving into a different world that I didn't grow up in, even though I worked in a diversity world. But I mean, the world that I worked in was a world where you didn't focus on how different we were. We focused on how we were the same and how we had the same problems and how we were going to work together and what kind of a relationship we needed together to make this work. I don't know how that all that work is going, that diversity, inclusive, all that stuff. But it feels a little to me as an outsider now that it might be sort of driving us a bit apart. And we have to be very careful, I think, with that work that we make sure that it's about relationship building, not catching you for saying the wrong word, right? That's just an old man talking here. But you know what? If you want to talk about relationships, relationship is about empathy and how we are the same and how we can work together and kind of those old fashioned ideas about work and getting things done in a society.
So, how do you move the needle with that, Bob? If you're going into an organization as a leader and you're noticing the culture's a little too action oriented, and you as a leader want to go, where's the relationships? Where's the possibility before we get to that action? What are the steps to a culture change of that magnitude?
Well, for those that have the power and the authority, they got to do the hard learning first. Because if they don't see that, I don't know how you really, I mean, they're the godfathers, right? If the godfather doesn't give the blessing, it's pretty hard. But if you follow my work at all, one of the things that I am a rebel is that I don't believe that leader comes with manager. You can be a manager and have the power and authority to do all that, but that doesn't mean you're a leader. Leadership is a practice, not a, a title. And so I, I developed this corner of the desk idea where everybody can be a leader, but your leadership might be very small. You might be just the person that facilitates meetings every once in a while, or your leadership might be that you look after the plants in the building, but it's something everybody takes a leadership role. And that's what's going to save us from leaders, big managers, let's call them the big shots that don't get this work, is that we can still do it at our level. We can take up a leadership practice ourselves and we can develop what I call communities of practice, communities of practitioners, and start to affect change in that way. That's a big story. That's bigger than the relationship thing. But I do think that the senior people have really got to have some serious conversations.
I want to jump back to some things because your focus a lot is tools that leaders can use to
Yeah.
be better at this relationship thing, at this
Right.
impact, this intention thing. So you were mentioning corner of your desk.
Yeah.
How is that a tool that can help with action and possibility?
First of all, when I talk about the desk, let's talk about it as a metaphor, right? 90% of what's on your desk is your job. And the job has very clear protocols. You get paid for your job. You get performance managed for your job. And you do the job for the organization, right? And the organization gives you the job. And you got to be hired for the job. And you're paid for the job. But for example, a simple little thing like facilitation. What we do in our organizations, what we used to do, anyways, maybe we don't anymore, I don't know. But we would hire consultants, experts to do things like facilitation. or coaching or conflict resolution or all kinds of these, what I call leadership practices. My argument is, hey, I know, and I can think of this woman right now. She works on the third floor. She works in finance, and she became very interested in facilitating. And we taught her how to do it. She started her own little practice. And within a couple of years, she was, yeah, it's Thursday afternoon. I'm going over to the blah, blah, blah department. And I'm going to do a facilitation. And she did it for no money. There was no performance management. It was a gift, a volunteer gift, like my old great, not mentor, but I wonder, Mayor Nenshi here talked about volunteerism. We need a spirit of volunteerism in our organizations where people they get 90% for their job, but what they could give back is 10% in volunteer work. And then that woman that did the facility, she started working with other people and they built a little community of practitioners. They saved the organization thousands of dollars. They were proud. They were so happy. Like they not only had they have a job, they now had a practice, all at 10% at the corner of their desk. I think it's a major breakthrough in leadership thinking that everybody can be a leader. Not everybody can be a manager or a boss, but they can take a leadership role in the organization. So that's the corner of the desk.
Even with that 10% though, Bob, you're giving them purpose. You're giving
Oh,
them impact. You're giving them, and that just fuels the bucket for, say, 90% that is the job. Maybe it's not great every day, but that 10% helps overcome that because it's also something they have additionally to look forward to. I love that.
I
I absolutely love.
I wrote a book called Bureaucratically Incorrect: Letter to a Young Public Servant. And one of the things that I remember saying to a group of youngsters, young public servants, was, I wish when I was 24 in going into public service, somebody would have told me about, Bob, not only will you have jobs, but you could have a practice. And if I would have developed my practice at 24 instead of 60, I would have had years of getting real good at that practice. And then the other thing the practice does, you can use those skills in the Girl Guides. You can use it in your community. You can use it after you retire. I mean, why wouldn't you want to develop a leadership practice? And yet I've even had managers say, I can't afford to give somebody 10%. They got to be 100% on the job. And I'm going, my friend, you've never heard the phrase. It's a wonderful phrase. I forget who said it, but a leader's job is to create more leaders. That's what we should be asking a leader at the end of the year. How many leaders did you create this year? Not how great you were. I don't give a rat's whatever about how great you were. I want to know how many leaders you created in your organization, because that's what's going to move that organization, not you.
So what's the benefit of having a practice? We've talked about it being great, but I mean it from a benefit standpoint of that 10%. How does it influence the 90%?
Oh, a couple reasons. One is a lot of people have accused me of being sort of anti-consultant, and I'm not. But the way we used consultants for 50 years was to get them to do our work. And what they should have been used for is to teach us how to do work better. So I'm skipping that. I'm going, let's go straight to the frontliners. Let's make them into practitioners. And we'll create pride and retention. People will stay in your organization if they get a chance to do a practice as well as a job. And they'll blossom, and we'll save thousands of dollars, which is a big deal, saving money. But we support those practitioners with incredible consultants who come in and teach them tools and practices on how to really be good at what you do. But I got really tired of us always looking outside the organization for help instead of looking inside the organization.
How does being a practitioner tie into the whole relationship possibility action piece. I can see that. I can definitely see it from a, if you're doing something you love, you will give it
Yeah.
more passion, more effort. You'll be looking forward to it. I just, for me personally, every time I'm in that mindset, I'm immediately thinking, who else can I work with? How can I
Yeah.
collaborate? Where's the innovation for this?
There you go.
And I'm thinking from the possibility standpoint, how have you seen it work?
Well, I think you almost answered your own question there because I mean, that's exactly what happens when you got in the BC Forest Service. We created a community of over 200 practitioners in the BC Forest Service. And the impact on that organization is still, the reverberations are still felt. And people said that was the most meaningful thing, but it was also my community. And I had relationships with 200 people. And then those relationships were with, we go and work for an afternoon with a finance group. And now we had relationships with them. And they didn't have a relationship with a consultant. They had a relationship with us inside. And so we were going across boundaries. We were breaking down silos with these practitioners, right? And we were doing it from the inside, not from the outside.
I want to tap back into something you had mentioned earlier, and you said it might be too high level, and I disagree because you were talking about community of practices, plural. And I think looking at it from a larger standpoint might be more beneficial. These practitioners becoming these communities of practice and having a very positive impact to a larger organization. How do you feel that could shift cultures if we start looking at communities of practice from a higher standpoint?
It's the only way to shift cultures. It's the only way. You got to do it from the inside. You can't go in with a strategic plan to shift the culture and say, we got some experts that are going to come in and shift your culture for you. That's not how it goes. One moment that I'll never forget, I was in Regina with F Division of the RCMP. And the guy that brought me in was a practitioner. His name was Russel, Russ Marasti. He was the first Cree Indian to become, he's now Lieutenant Governor of Saskatchewan, Russ. And he was one of my practitioners. And he brought me in because he was head of F Division. And he wanted me to do that open space with the 250 frontline cops. And we did. We spent an afternoon. And again, 110 possibilities, 110 recommendations came out of that little 2 or 3 hour session. It was amazing. And the brass took me aside. We went out for dinner and they said, Bob, what the hell just happened there? 100, we did. And I said, look, you guys, you're cops. You can tell me where every hooker, every wino, every drug deal is going on in F Division, but you can't tell me what your own people are saying. And the penny just dropped in that room. They had no idea what 250 frontline people were thinking because they never asked them. They never put them in a room. And that's what practitioners can do, is they can open up these floodgates. And that was 250 cops that were talking to each other like they've never talked to each other before because they were all in their little groups. So
So,
that's the power of this practice-based work. Yeah, for sure.
so what's getting in the way of all of us not embracing this in our organizations, Bob? Like, it sounds like the way to go. It sounds like, why wouldn't you want to fuel motivation and innovation and collaboration? What is getting in the way?
I don't think anything's getting in the way, Russell. I think except ignorance. A guy like Doug Conkin, the deputy minister of BC Forests. I said, Doug, how come you like my work so much? He was a deputy minister that just loved it. He said, Bob, I dream now of running an organization of 3,500 people where 3,500 people had a job and 3,500 people had a practice. And my heart just stopped. My God, he got it. And the only reason he got it was he learned. He gave me an opportunity to teach him that. And that's all that's getting in our way now. That's why learning organizations, was one of the most critical theoretical models Peter Senge at MIT. You've got to have at the core. And we've got CEOs in that who haven't got a clue about how to engage and engage thousands of people. And you do it by getting them to do it, right? Yeah, you get them to do it.
So I'm going to wrap this up with a question that
Yeah.
I've heard my favorite word used a lot in this conversation, which is relationships. So perfect question to wrap us up, Bob. What's one simple action, an action here, that people can do right now to improve their relationships at work?
Oh my God. I'm going to follow up on what I just said.
Perfect.
Learn more. Don't assume you know everything about relationships. Learn more. Read a book. Ask people. Take it. Do anything, but learn. At the core, don't take a course or a workshop that isn't going to promise you at the beginning at least 5 tools to do it. I spent all my years. I said, I hate motivational speakers. I hate workshops that give all these big theoretical ideas, but they don't give me a Monday morning tool to actually how to do that. And that's what I would say your action should be, folks. If you're listening, get your learning up to speed on this work and make sure that it's attached to tools and practices. Theory without practice is kind of like benign.
That is Bob Chartier. He is an author, keynote speaker, and the author of a best-selling book you should really pick up called Handcrafted Leadership. Thank you so much for being here, Bob.
Thanks, Russell. I really appreciated this. You're doing good work.